My name is Mike Soliday, and I taught on Guam a few years ago for 5 years, and I'm a teacher for the deaf, hard of hearing, maybe 27 years, getting close to 30. But part of that was also with hearing kids for 10 years, because I wanted that different perspective and challenge that that most deaf and hard of hearing people don't get. I have a legal guardian son, Paul, that I got from Guam, and who is also deaf. And we moved to the States to give him more opportunity. It was really tough to set that kind of priority because I love Guam, and I wanted to be here to help all the children on Guam and not just one person, my son. But it was a wise choice, and he's doing very, very well. I was born hearing, and at the time we were living in Florida, I contracted a rare case of pneumonia, which gave me a temperature of about 108. And so because of that, they gave me some medication that probably affected my hearing faculty, and they really felt that it probably would affect my sight and my mobility. They felt that maybe I would be blind, deaf, crippled, mentally retarded. Though fortunately I was only deaf, as far as I know. I might have other problems, but definitely the big one. But it wasn't until I was 3 or 4 when my mom noticed that I wasn't responding to sound like some of the other children that she was with other families. So she took me to the doctor. However, before she took me to the doctor, she broke her toe. So she couldn't get around. So she was on crutches. She takes me to the doctor, and then we're sitting in the waiting room, and she said I was wild. I was just running around, I was picking up toys, I was throwing them, and about 15 minutes later, the doctor came out and told my mom, "Your boy is not deaf. Take him home and spank him." So she had to go home. And so when her toe was better, then she went to a different doctor. And that's when she found out that I was indeed deaf or hard of hearing. And that was in Oklahoma. So they put me in a school for the deaf in Chickasha. And I was only there maybe 6 months because my mom just could not stand me being away from home at 4 or 5 years old. So she brought me back home, and ever since then, she was mainly responsible for making sure I got the speech therapy, the right teachers, all the support services that are now in place because of the public laws that back in 1974 or 75. For the longest time, I was probably the only deaf or hard of hearing child in school, growing up and in schools and growing up in the neighborhood. All of my friends were hearing, and maybe 4 years of the elementary school, I went to a special school. Because when they put me in a regular school, 3rd grade, during the day I would spin myself. So I would be sick and then go home. And so I did it again. And so pretty soon the school and my parents figured out that I was getting sick on purpose to avoid the kind of studying that was at that school. So they put me in a special school called Smouse Elementary School. And that was a school for all handicapped kids. So deaf, blind, cerebral palsy, whatever medical condition. But there was a really large group of deaf and hard of hearing kids, and that was when I had a circle of deaf and hard of hearing friends, and that helped me tremendously to be able to have kids like myself that I could spend time with, not only at school, but sometimes after school. I still kept my neighborhood friends to do things with, but often I would lean toward back to having my own circle of deaf and hard of hearing friends. And there I got speech therapy, and again, that was all before Public Law 94-142. And it just happened that that school was like ahead of the time by providing all the services for reading, speech therapy every day. Never knew sign language, never learned sign language. I grew up and never heard about it. And I think, to be honest, to this day, my parents didn't really think about it either, because when I started school in Oklahoma, I was mainstream, because I had 2 hearing aids and I had speech. I was able to hear with the hearing aids, and so my parents didn't really feel that I needed the sign. And maybe because I was at the deaf school in the very beginning, maybe that was the reason they pulled me. Because they had established their philosophy of oral education. My parents moved to Colorado Springs so I could be mainstream to high school there, because my cousin was an English teacher there. And so they wanted to make sure that I was with somebody who understood what I needed at school. And again, my mom was the advocate. She was the itinerant teacher, going to the school, talking to the principal, the teachers, making sure I got note takers, and making sure that I was in the right classes. Because when I first went there, they put me in all the low-level classes. And then, but quickly they realized that was the wrong placement. And so they agreed with my parents to put me in the regular classes with the kids. And I think the hardest part there was not education, but social. I only had 1 or 2 hearing friends that didn't mind hanging out with a deaf person. There were many times when I would introduce myself to someone, and we would be talking, and now this is 1975. Our hair is down to here, so nobody knew I had hearing aids. And because I had extensive speech therapy, my speech was pretty good. And so we would go to class, and then they wanted to sit in the back. And I'd say, I'm sorry, I have to sit up front. How come? Because I'm deaf, and I read lips, and I need to be up front. Well, they shocked them. They were like, oh. And they didn't know what to do. And so many times when that happened, I never saw them again. So some of my best friends I had in school were the ones that lived in my neighborhood where I lived. That high school year also, when I turned 18, I strongly believed that I was going to become hearing again. That day came, and I was depressed, because I thought I was going to wake up hearing, and then I had to put my hearing aid on. And I think my parents knew that I needed some kind of closure or understanding to accept that I was always going to be deaf or hard of hearing. So they sent me to a doctor, and I had surgery, exploratory surgery, because the doctor thought maybe he could help me. But of course, back then the x-rays were pretty crude, and it wasn't really clear. And so after that surgery, that was when I really accepted that I was forever deaf. Because I came out of the recovery room, and then I asked the nurse, did they find something? And she said no. And I didn't get upset. I just went, okay. And that was it for me. Yeah. And so that was probably the roughest time in high school, was finally accepting that I was deaf and I could move on. Then from high school, I went on to college. And that was an interesting phase because I went to Iowa State to major in pre-vet, and I hated chemistry, and that probably was my downfall. But I went to Iowa State. Again, I was the only deaf person there, and I was getting my own note takers. I was making sure I would sit up front, I would talk to the professors, but the support that I needed wasn't there because I was doing everything myself and trying so hard to just be normal. Even though I accepted my deafness, I wanted to be normal, so I could just do everything myself. But after the first semester, everything just crashed. It was just too much emotionally. It was too much to organize interpreters, note takers, and then trying to find time to study. So I gave up. Went back home, and a friend of mine introduced me to Utah State because they had a program, a support program for deaf and hard of hearing students. This was in 1975, and that was right at the beginning of Public Law 94-142. So Utah State was one of the first programs, even though they had Gallaudet, NCID and RIT in Rochester, New York, Northridge in California, they had those programs, but they didn't, those programs were signing lots of interpreter stuff. Well, I didn't know sign language, so I couldn't use the interpreters. So I went to Utah State, and there was probably maybe, I don't know, 15, 20 deaf and hard of hearing students, but it was like when I was in elementary school, I had those groups of friends for emotional support and social activities that helped me to survive in an educational environment. And graduated from Utah State in 1979 with a degree in elementary education. So I looked for a job as a regular education teacher. And it was tough to find a school district that would hire a deaf person, because everything was so new with all the disabled people being able to seek regular jobs. And so many interviews, no job. So I went home, back to Des Moines, where my parents were, working for a bank, delivering money and checks, waiting for somebody to rescue me. And fortunately, there was a supervisor who had heard about me from, I guess, my parents talking to friends, and then he found out that I was deaf and hard of hearing, and I graduated in elementary education, and then I had taken quite a few special ed classes. So he called me and said if I would take just these 2 classes during the summer, he would hire me to be an itinerant teacher for the deaf and hard of hearing for the school district. So I did it. And then once again, a small circle of deaf and hard of hearing people that I could have support, and then fortunately had a supervisor that believed that I could do the job. And from there, that was my beginning of my work life. I met somebody at one of the deaf groups with a hearing ear dog. And I love dogs. You know, I've always been around dogs as I grew up. And so this person explained to me how service dogs work. And I really liked that idea of having a dog with me everywhere I go. And so I approached my boss at work, and I shared my idea of having a service dog so that not only for myself, but as an educational tool for parents and for the children that I would be working with. And so I applied for the service dog within Massachusetts. And I went out and they had to train me to learn how to keep the dog in training. So I did that for 2 weeks, brought the dog home, and that was my first dog, Mandy. And I had her for 8 years. And hearing your dogs, they help me wake up in the morning when the alarm clock goes off. When the smoke and fire alarm goes off, they let me know that that's happening. They go around in circles, and my current hearing your dog, Quincy, she just gets all excited. She's jumping around, barking, and very excited. So I know that's a signal for the smoke and fire alarm. Let me know if somebody's knocking on the door or ringing the doorbell, because if I'm in my bedroom, I don't hear it. And so they let me know. And I used to have them let me know when the phone's ringing. But with technology, using a cell phone, that's pretty much not an issue anymore. And we have another dog for my son, Olivia. I can call their name. If I'm in the kitchen, I say, "Where's Paul?" And they run and get Paul and come back to me, run and get Paul. So Paul knows he has to come to wherever I am. And then he does the same thing, but he calls me Grandpa. Where's Grandpa? Because the dogs are like our children in the family, so I guess I'm Grandpa. But it's pretty cool that we can just ask the dog to alert somebody when we're calling them. Like a normal family would yell up the stairs or something for the kid to come down for dinner. I just ask the dog to go get Paul. Yeah. But I've had dogs for over 25 years. I've had my third hearing ear dog, and it's been a great tool because it educates the public, and it educates the parents, and it educates students. It's amazing when I first go to a school to work with deaf and hard of hearing kids, and they don't know about service dogs. They don't know that there's more out there for them that they can use in the real world when they leave school. And so it's a great educational tool, and it's a good excuse to bring your pet everywhere you go. Yeah. I think if I wanted to change or improve an education program for the Department of Education on Guam, I would highly suggest that they find a very strong language and reading, research-proven based program, at least 90 minutes a day. Not every other day because of block scheduling or something like that, because that is the deaf and hard of hearing child's greatest weakness, and it's the language. Yeah. So that's what I would ask for elementary, middle school, and high school, is to be sure that they get those kinds of services. I would also make sure that elementary and middle school have a very strong speech program, so that even though that they're doing sign, they still need the other aspects of language development that a speech therapist understands. Whereas the teacher, they're more focused on the academic part. And there's usually little time for speech development, and so that's what I would do there. Then preschool, again, I would have a very strong preschool program with an itinerant teacher that can work at the school, but also after school, go to the home to work with parents so that the language development continues not only at school, but at home. So the parents can understand what else can they do? What can they do to make sure that their child will be successful after high school? From the very beginning, language acquisition for a deaf and hard of hearing student doesn't begin at kindergarten when kids go to school. It begins at the moment that they are able to communicate with their child, whether it's sign language, whether it's oral, it doesn't matter. They just need to be introduced to words. And what is the paper? What is a shell? What is the coconut? And being able to match word to the things that are a part of their life. Food. It's amazing how many deaf and hard of hearing kids here on Guam don't know the names of certain food that are at the fiesta. And that is the responsibility of parents to introduce words. So if I was going to have a small fiesta, I would put words next to the food so that every time they have a meal at home, put a little card with words so that they can match the word with the food. So language acquisition begins at home as soon as they understand language. And that's where I feel that when I was an itinerant teacher in Iowa, the itinerant teacher went to the home of the parent starting at 3. Even though they went to school, but after school, the itinerant teacher went to the home to help parents learn how to raise a deaf child. And I think that's lacking, not only just Guam, but all over in the United States, is education for parents, so that they can continue helping their own child at home. And because with that, language grows, and not only at school, but at home. For everyone, parent, family, friend, is to not believe that there's a limit to what their child or their friend can do. Because as everyone always says, the sky's the limit, but the universe is the limit. There's no need to limit what a child can do. Every child can learn, and every child can communicate, and every child can become something. You know, maybe they won't reach their dreams. Like I didn't reach my dream to become a vet. But it took an experience to understand what I can or can't do, and that was something I learned for myself. But nobody stopped me from doing that, and I think that's the key. Do not put limits on anyone. Okay. Very good. So, thank you. Bye. Call.